Wasn't Ray Kyle Murray from FTN Daily back again with the PrizePicks Prop Show, bringing us my favorite NFL plays for Week 3. We did miss Week 2. I was out of town, so unfortunately I missed Week 2 after a great Week 1. We started off 5 for 5. It was technically 4 for 4. We had the free square for the Tom Brady, over half a passing yard, but nonetheless, we will take the 10x on the week from that one PrizePicks parlay. So let's get right into it. Week 3, looking forward to kind of keeping that momentum rolling. Had some opportunity to look at the Week 2 boards. Did a little bit, wasn't as much success, but not a completely bad week either. However, I was kind of getting ready, itching to get back into the swing of things and hopefully give you guys another 5 for 5. So I got 5 picks for you guys today. Let's start off with Patrick Mahomes over 7.5 rushing yards. Now this number does feel a bit low, and if you guys look at the PrizePicks Edge tool over on FTN Daily, where you can kind of compare my projections with the PrizePicks lines, you'll see a lot of times quarterback rushing yards kind of float to the top. It's just because these lines are always very small. You see guys at 2.5, 3.5 lines. So if they have 6 rushing yards or 7 rushing yard projections, it's going to be very easy to not only get over that number, but also look like a massive edge. But so when you're looking at that, keep that in mind. But now for this Patrick Mahomes play, I do think that there's a very significant real edge here. She's only averaging 2 rushing yards per game this season, and I think that's partially why we see this line so low. But when you look over the course of his career, Patrick Mahomes is averaging over 18 yards per game. That's 11 more yards than we see the line here on PrizePicks. So I love this bet here. Patrick Mahomes over 7.5, and that's actually the number 1 bet in the PrizePicks Edge tool, which is free every single week. So make sure you guys are checking that out every single week before you put in your PrizePicks plays. But that's pick number 1, Patrick Mahomes over 7.5 rushing yards. Pick number 2, Cordell Patterson over 14.5 receiving yards. This one you kind of need a little bit of a blind faith, I guess you could call it. We saw a decent week from Cordell Patterson in Week 1. Obviously, there's a few underlying circumstances with Damian Williams, being in the game and looking to be heavily favored and heavily kind of participating in that offense there. And he was eventually ruled out of that game, and you saw Cordell Patterson really take over in a big way. Week 2, Tyler Algier comes in, he gets 10 carries. He plays a good amount after being a healthy scratch in Week 1. So I don't think we're necessarily going to see Cordell Patterson just have this backfield to himself, but I actually think that helps him a little bit in the passing game, which might sound crazy because we did not see that at all in Week 2. He had 0 receiving yards, but I just don't see them continuing to not involve him in the passing game. He was so involved last year in the passing game. He was so involved just everywhere. And again, Cordell Patterson, since he's been a Falcon, has been very explosive. So 14.5 receiving yards. That's a prop he could easily hit in one play. And again, they're going to look to get the ball in this guy's hands, whether it be via screens out of the backfield as a receiver. He's going to get some looks through the air as well as on the ground. So like Cordell Patterson to go over this number, and what you could arguably say is his best matchup of the season. He faced the Rams last week, and now this week he gets to play Seattle. So I think that this could potentially be his best matchup as well. Pick number 3, again, potentially some blind faith needed here. It's going to be Rhys Hall over 27.5 rushing yards. Now, Rhys Hall went over this number in a pretty substantial way in one of his first 2 games of this season, but the curious thing for me for Rhys Hall was the snap trends compared to Week 1 versus what we saw last week in Week 2. It actually went down in terms of what we saw from how often he was playing. I do think that has to do with how involved he was going to be in 2-minute drills and in extreme passing situations, because we actually saw Ty Johnson get involved. I don't think that they're going to want to continue to mix in Ty Johnson a ton, at least not to a point where it's cutting into Rhys Hall. If anything, I think as the season goes on, we should expect, or at least hope, that it's going to cut into Michael Carter rather than Rhys Hall. I mean, keep in mind, the Jets went out and spent a lot to draft Rhys Hall here in the most recent NFL draft. So there's no doubt in my mind that he's going to eventually lead this backfield. So you should be looking for trends to go upward rather than downward on a guy like Rhys Hall and a lot of other rookies as well. So when you see numbers like this, you can look for edges that way. And again, Rhys Hall should be an explosive runner, and from all things that we saw from him in college, he should be very efficient. So 27.5 rushing yards should be no problem for him if he can get something like 6, 7, 8 carries. A lot of his rushing attempts props is about 6.5. I like the over on that. My model has him for about 10 and 40 plus yards. So I really like this number here. Rhys Hall over 27.5 rushing yards. Fourth pick of the day is going to be A.J. Dillon over 13.5 receiving yards. A.J. Dillon's been pretty heavily involved in the passing game. Last week we saw him with 3 targets. In week 1 he had 6. The game script's definitely going to play a factor in what we see from Dillon, but regardless, I think he's going to be involved in the passing game. Him and Aaron Jones alike, they just aren't really confident from what I can see in any of these wide receivers outside of maybe Allen Lazard. And when you consider how important these running backs are to their offensive success, these guys are going to be involved on the ground and through the air. And again, 13.5 receiving yards is a line that I think A.J. Dillon could go over on one catch. We saw in week 1 where he had 5 catches for 46 yards. Maybe we're not expecting that much volume and that much efficient production, but 3 catches I think is a realistic number here for A.J. Dillon. I think he gets this done if he just gets 2 catches. So 2 or 3 catches I think is exactly the sweet spot for A.J. Dillon to hit the over on this number. So really like A.J. Dillon over 13.5 receiving yards. And the final play of the day, and arguably my favorite play of the entire week, not only on PrizePicks, but on some other places where you can go and look for props or maybe even look for DFS plays, fantasy season long. Obviously, season long, you're not considering this guy as even a remote sit. Obviously, you're playing this guy every single week with a ton of confidence, but it's Justin Jefferson over 7 receptions. Absolutely love this spot for Jefferson. Love this spot in general for a lot of players in this game. Extremely impressive and, one that I'm very high on, and that's the game environment. Now, when you look at some of the things that these two teams have been doing, Minnesota's been playing fairly slow. They're about the 14th or 15th fastest team on the slate, but you look at their game against Green Bay, that could have potentially slowed them down a little bit when they had a pretty commanding lead. So when you look at the neutral script, they're around 12-13 in terms of neutral script pace. But when you look over at Detroit, and they're one of the fastest teams in all of football. They're top 3 in pace so far this season in neutral scripts. So when you're looking at a spot where you can consider not only a fast environment, but a significant improvement on what you're expecting as a baseline for Minnesota, I'm expecting more offensive production, more offensive plays, more volume, which is only going to be good for Justin Jefferson, who's a guy who has a 31% target share on the year. And personally, I think that 31%, based on what we saw on the field, is low. You saw the absolute dominance from the Vikings in week 1 over the Packers. They took their foot off the gas, quite frankly. They weren't throwing as much. They weren't looking for Jefferson as much in the second half after he torched them for about 180 yards in the first half. In the second half, in the second week, the second game against Philadelphia, they did get beat up a little bit, but that Philadelphia defense is arguably the best defense in all of football. Definitely top 5 in my opinion. So yeah, sure, they did have a tough time moving the ball, but we still saw 12 targets, 6 catches for Justin Jefferson in that game, where towards the end of the fourth quarter, we saw Adam Dillon rack up 3 or 4 catches in a row just because it was garbage time, dump down time for Adam Dillon. That's not a thing I'm probably going to be expecting a ton from this Minnesota offense this week. I think it's going to be a very competitive game. I think it's going to be very fast-paced and exciting. That's only going to be good for Justin Jefferson, who is definitely going to continue to be the focal point of this offense. Like I mentioned, 31% target share. I actually think that we could potentially see that go up as the season goes on. And again, I think he's going to continue to be looked at early and often. And over 7 receptions is arguably my favorite play of the week. But that's going to do it for me this week. Good luck to all of you guys. Again, looking to kind of carry over on that momentum. If you are a new user over at PrizePicks, make sure you're using that code above, FTN. You can get yourself a 100% deposit match up to $100. So if you're looking to get in on PrizePicks, do not pass up on that bonus. It's free money. Great way to get that bankroll started. But again, that's going to do it for us. If you guys are watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Stay up to date for all of the PrizePicks and other content as well over on the FTN Network YouTube